Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
You go into your shower feeling... But as soon as you reach for the Irish Spring, your day immediately gets better. That crisp, fresh, unmistakable Irish Spring scent zings your brain and awakens your senses. So when you finally emerge from the shower, 37 minutes later, because you pay the water bill so you can stay in there as long as you want, you're ready to take on the day. And smell great doing it. Irish Spring Body Wash and Bar Soap. Fresh, green, Irish. Shop now at Walmart.
The NFL Draft is now officially open. Welcome to another episode of Draft Season. It's presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at moodys.com. Welcome to Draft Season, everybody. I am John Schmeelk, as always, joined by my partner in crime, Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. Tony, good to talk to you, man. Not a weekend of college football full of, huge rivalry games or top 10 teams facing each other, but we did have some pretty good ball games.
Yeah, we did. I mean, the whole, realignment of college football has kind of thrown things into, the first couple of weeks linger on more than they should. We did have a few good games, and we will have more moving forward. I mean, starting this coming week.
Yeah, so let's start with, I think, probably the game of the week in terms of competitiveness and two teams that are pretty good, and that's LSU and South Carolina. I want to start there here, Tony. Your thoughts on that game and what you saw from those two SEC teams?
Well, it was a wild game. I mean, South Carolina dominated the early part of the game. LSU came back, and then, South Carolina looked like it would pull it out, and LSU wins in the last moment. So that was a very entertaining game to watch all 4 hours of it, because the game didn't end until after 4:00 in the afternoon. I mean, a couple of things. It's tough to talk about the defense, considering the final score was 36-33 or something like that. I think off the top, what stood out to me about that game was how ineffective and how poor Will Campbell, the left tackle of LSU, looked. I mean, he looked like he was on roller skates. And it's something that I noticed about Will Campbell going back to when I did my film work on LSU over the summer. He doesn't play with that killer instinct. Last week I heaped praise on Kelvin Banks, the offensive left tackle from Texas. Will Campbell was getting beat left and right, and when he is engaged in the block, he just doesn't really seem to work to bury the opponent into the ground. That's something to keep an eye on. On my rankings, I have Kelvin Banks slightly below Will Campbell. But Campbell, it wasn't that he just wasn't impressive. He was bad on Saturday against a South Carolina team that doesn't have great pass rushers. Kyle Kennard, the transfer, had an outstanding game, but most scouts grade him as a undrafted free agent, not even a priority free agent. Maybe that changes moving forward if Kennard is able to string more games like this together, especially against top tackles. He also has to test well. TJ Sanders, the interior defensive lineman of South Carolina, had his moments. He's a guy who, if you watched the Georgia game last year, he was a one-man show. He takes over the games. He's quick. He's explosive. He's strong. He's just got to do it on a more consistent basis. But Sanders, the interior defensive tackle from South Carolina, is a guy that's got day two potential if he enters the draft. But keep an eye on Will Campbell. I mean, he's not played all that well this year. He was not good against South Carolina. And I think, like most people, I figure he's going to be a top 10 pick.
Yeah, when I watched his tape from last year over the summer, he looked like he sure as heck looked like a top 10 pick to me. Yeah. So we'll see if he can kind of clean things up as the year goes along. Two guys I want to ask you about, Tony, from that game. A player that we talked about, I think at this time last year, was Raheem Sanders, the South Carolina running back, and then he kind of fell off the grid a little bit. Bigger guy, he's listed at 230 pounds, and last year, you're reporting you had him fluctuate upwards of like 250, I think, right, at some point during the year. But he's come off to a strong start this year. 19 carries, 143 yards, 2 touchdowns versus LSU. Does he have a chance of reasserting himself into this running back mix this year?
I if he continues to play the way he played against LSU, absolutely. I mean, it looks like the change of scenery has really done Raheem Sanders real good. Yeah, he's a bigger guy. He's not an exterior runner. He's got good short area quickness. I mean, if he keeps playing like this, could he be a early day 3 pick a la Brandon Allen of Wisconsin, who went with the Jets? Absolutely. Good for Raheem Sanders. I mean, there's problems at that Arkansas program, as we've seen. And the change of scenery has done him well. And he was dominant against LSU. Had a terrific game. But again, you're looking at more of as a one-dimensional, between the tackles downhill ball carrier.
What do you think of Nussmeier? And we haven't seen him for that many games. We know end of last year he flashed, and now he did well at the first couple games this year. Your thoughts on him? He's a little bit of like a kind of like a very relaxed gunslinger type feel to me watching him.
Solid, not spectacular. 4th-year junior. Let's see how he does this year. I don't see any big rises of draft boards. If he's right now draftable, it's probably in the late part. You want to see a bigger body of work. I mean, had to sit behind Jaden Daniels the prior 2 years. A guy to watch. I'm not doing black backflips over him. I'm not putting him, within the top 10 of my quarterbacks just yet.
All right, let's jump over to another SEC team, Alabama, taking on Wisconsin in this game. Jalen Milroe continues to flash, Tony. I went back and I watched some of the key plays from his first couple weeks. You see the flash plays, the consistency of the pocket passing, probably not quite there yet. But I know you like what you see. And by the way, we are going to have Tony's top 5s, top 10s in all the offensive positions today. And Jalen Milroe will make an appearance there. But you want to talk about him and the Wisconsin quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke.
Yeah, I think you saw what in that game against Wisconsin, what can be frustrating about Jalen Milroe and just the utter incredible potential that he has. Early on, struggling moving that Alabama offense off of a bad game against South Florida the prior week, which seems to have the Alabama's number, although, he was able to get it going later on. And then towards the end of the first half, he picked it up. He had that beautiful 31-yard touchdown pass on 3rd and 7 late in the second quarter, where he basically just placed it over in the receiver's hands, over the defender. It was a magnificent throw, which Jalen Milroe has shown, the ability to do. Then he runs, he takes an end around and he runs it into the end zone. So, I think you use the word consistency, and that is what it is with Jalen Milroe. The guy has incredible upside. You saw, I thought he started to really put it together and put the pedal to the metal in that Wisconsin game from the late part of the second quarter through the second half. Let's see what happens moving forward. Every week, watch out. He's gonna meteor up draft boards because he has all the physical skills. It is just the consistency passing the ball and moving the offense, and the consistency with the pass placement, especially downfield sometimes, because some of his downfield passes can be way off, that are the question marks with Milroe.
And then how about the 2 players from Wisconsin you want to talk about, Van Dyke and his receiver, Will Pauling?
Well, I mean, Van Dyke, it's just sad what happened to him. He was playing reasonably well for Wisconsin, and then on a seemingly innocent play, tears an ACL. His season's done. So, I mean, here's a guy, going back to when he was early days of Miami, everybody was all excited about him being a NFL prospect. It was basically, he played very, uninspired football at Miami, goes to Wisconsin, seems to get in the groove, seems to have something good going. Now he's got a torn ACL. It'll be interesting to see, does he go back to Wisconsin? Does the NCAA allow him to go back to Wisconsin? Will Pauling, the junior receiver from Wisconsin, big play receiver, but he's also a reliable receiver. Goes about 6'1", 200 plus pounds. He's got decent speed. Only a junior, somebody to keep an eye on.
No question. I think Van Dyke was 5 of 5 in that game before that injury. So
Right.
just bad news for the quarterback there. Hate to see it. Another group of fans that have hated to see everything that's gone on earlier in the year, Tony, is fans that follow the Florida State Seminoles. What is going on?
Yeah, and I mean, it's just bad. I mean, granted, they were undefeated last year with Jordan Travis. and you expected big things this year, and no one's producing there. It's not just the quarterback. Ukulele has not been good. Their defensive line, if you watch that Memphis game, literally the first three quarters, the Memphis offensive line, who has players on it that are at best late round draft picks, a lot of them aren't even NFL prospects, are pushing around Josh Farmer, are taking care of Patrick Payton. I mean, these guys, they turned it on late in the game, but they were non-existent the first half of the game. They really haven't been that existent much this season. So it's interesting with Florida State. Roy Dale Williams has had his moments, but not only from a team perspective, but whether it's Patrick Payton, whether it's Josh Farmer, whether it's Maurice Smith, the offensive center, who a lot of people like, or DJ Ukulele, who showed signs of life last year at Oregon State. These guys have been failures on the football field, as you can see with the 0-3 record that the Florida Seminoles have put up this year, but they've also significantly hurt their draft stock.
Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart, so check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, let's jump over to Georgia and Kentucky. I think I was surprised this game was as close as it was. Went down late fourth quarter, very low-scoring game. And a lot of the guys on defense for both teams, Tony, jumped out in this game.
Yeah, well, first, I think you got to start with that Kentucky defensive front line and that interior of the Kentucky defense. Everyone knows about Deion Walker, Keyshawn Silver, the junior, the other big defensive tackle, Derek Jackson, their terrific run-stuffing linebacker, Jamin Dumas Johnson, the transfer from Georgia. These guys were terrific. I mean, the first literally 3 quarters of that game. And again, not only from game perspective, but what you saw with Deion Walker, as well as Keyshawn Silver, playing against one of the best, if not the best, interior offensive lines in college football. And they basically just stymied that Georgia offense. Georgia was not able to move the ball at all. And when you look at, I mentioned Dylan Fairchild, Michael Morris, Tate Ratledge, who got hurt and had to be carted off the field. I mean, these guys are all top 100, top 125 picks from the Georgia offensive line. And Kentucky, the first 3.5 quarters, really had their way defensively with them. The problem is Kentucky just couldn't move the ball. I'm not a big fan of their quarterback. I think that was part of the problem. But when you look, I mentioned him last week, Jalen Walker. I mean, he looks like the next big-time defensive player to come out of the Georgia system. He's an athletic guy. He was terrific rushing the passer. Last year, as a rotational linebacker, they used him in space, and he showed a lot of ability. Walker was a week 1 riser at my Sports Skeeter column. He just continues to improve and improve. I had a 3rd-round grade coming into him on him coming into the season. That has since improved based on his play in the early going.
2 offensive players for Georgia here, Tony. Trevor Etienne and Carson Beck, both kept largely in check. Etienne, 19 rushes, 79 yards in the game. Carson Beck just 15 of 24 for 160.
Yeah, but the thing with Etienne was he took over the game late in that game. What happened was, I don't know whether the Kentucky defense was just, getting tired, was just gassed because the Kentucky offense could not move the ball. But the reason that Georgia won that game was because late in the game, starting in the fourth quarter, they started handing the ball to Trevor Etienne. He started running around the edge, started turning the perimeter. And that is when the Kentucky defense broke down and Georgia finally took over that game. And I know you're a fan of Etienne. I am a fan of Etienne. You can see the creativity, the quickness, the footwork, the balance that he runs with, the ability to make defenders miss. You can see why, you talked about Raheem Sanders before. Trevor Etienne is the exact contradiction of Raheem Sanders. He is not a big interior mauler. He's a guy that can turn the perimeter, that will make defenders miss, have them grasping at air. And that's what you saw in that Kentucky-Georgia game late in the contest, which is why Georgia won the game.
Yeah, it doesn't run with a ton of power between the tackles, but his elusiveness, you could definitely see him be a weapon in the pass game once he gets to the National Football League. And just your thoughts real quick on Carson Beck. He made a couple of really nice throws over the middle, I thought, in small areas. I thought they played defense on those Georgia wide receivers very well. But again, just 160 yards, 15 to 24.
And that's Carson Beck. I mean, we'll talk about it more when we get into the quarterback rankings. Carson Beck is sort of a miniaturized Jalen Milroe in that he makes some wild passes. He'll make some nice passes, but you don't do it on a consistent basis. Now, only 160 yards. You said that they covered the receivers well. A lot of that credit has got to go to the Kentucky defenders and the guys that I just mentioned, because they basically they stymied that Georgia offense for 3.5 quarters.
All right, two other games real quick, Tony, before we get to, or one other game and then one other item we want to get to before we get to your top 10 list at each position here. First, Colorado State. I watched a lot of this game, and, Torrey Horton, the wide receiver for Colorado State, not 100% healthy yet, but
Nope.
Travis Hunter, cornerback and wide receiver, certainly outproduced him in really both ways, whether you're looking at the head-to-head cornerback wide receiver matchup or the wide receiver matchup.
Yeah, I was hoping to see Torrey Hunter go head-to-head with Travis Hunter. He's injured. I mean, he's a guy that's well-liked in the scouting community, got a fourth-round grade last year, decided to go back to Colorado State for another season. I hope it works out for him. But, I mean, Travis Hunter, I still think there are some hurdles in the road, some bumps in the road as far as his cornerback skills are concerned, and he's got to brush them off. But wow, I mean, he's just so terrific as a receiver, so very natural, a game breaker, so quick, so explosive. So again, I mean, we'll talk about this later on. Is a team going to draft him as a running back? Is a team going to convert him as select him as a cornerback? Are they going to use him at both?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now wide receiver would be my guess, just because I think that's where he's going to want to play, because that's where the bigger checks are coming in at the National Football League level these days. But we'll see how that goes. Two other wide receivers, Tony. They were kind of the consensus two top wideouts in the class heading in, and both Luther Burden and Teteroa McMillan, I believe I have that correct. Neither one has disappointed this year. They both continue to produce.
No, Burden was very key in the Missouri comeback against Boston College, and I wrote this in my write-up at Sportskeeda on Missouri. If the draft were held today, Luther Burden would be the highest-rated player on most boards in NFL war rooms.
Really?
Doesn't mean he would be the first player selected, but it means when all the grades came out, Luther Burden's name would be at the top as far as most of those teams are concerned. And he's an explosive receiver. He's a game-breaking receiver, but he's also got good size, and he brings the element of return specialist. 6 receptions, 117 yards, and 1 TD in that comeback win over Boston College. McMillan, 11 receptions for 138 yards against the Kansas State secondary, or Kansas State defense, I should say, that has 3 draftable players in the secondary. So Kansas State knew the ball was going to McMillan. They've got talented players there, but they couldn't stop him. Granted, Kansas State won the game by a large margin, so that they don't care. But still, I mean, McMillan, I said this a couple of weeks ago. He reminds me of Calvin Johnson minus the 4.37 speed. He is so natural. He's so fluid. I mean, the quarterback is going to target him. The pass is going to him, yet you can't stop him. And the fundamentals which he catches the ball with, the eye-hand coordination, there's so much to love about this guy. It'll be interesting to see how fast or how well he tests in the lead-up. I could see like a 42-inch vertical jump, an 11-inch broad jump, and then a 4.5 140. We'll see what happens.
And you're right. What jumps out at me, Tony, is how naturally he catches the ball with his hands. Yeah. He reaches out there and just grabs it out of the air. And I love the fact that the two top wide receivers, Tony, they're so different. One guy is the tall, lanky outside guy. Burden's more of your, physical run after catch, explosive guy. I think it'll be a real good conversation about which one of those guys go number one when we get to the spring, and how it's going to be a lot of, what style do you want? What style you're looking for? And I think that'll be a fun thing to break down.
Absolutely. And again, I think, we saw it last year with the wide receiver from Texas. He runs a 4.19. Everybody's in love with him, but there were better natural pass catchers than him in the draft. And I think that is going to be the story with McMillan in the lead up to the draft. Not the fastest guy in the world, not a downfield threat, but a Drake London times 2 type of receiver that's got size, that is fluid, that just catches everything in sight.
Draft season is presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risks into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right. So for this week and next week, we're going to split Tony's top 10 list into 2 groups here. We're going to do offense this week. We'll do defense. I think we're going to do it next week, folks. The Giants have a Thursday game, so I'm not sure we're going to have time to get that thing up. So we might wait until the following Monday or Tuesday. I'll figure that out with Tony over the course of this week, how we're going to handle next week with the Giants playing on Thursday. It's just a real tight week here. It's hard to get a lot of content in over just a couple of days before that Thursday game. So it'll be this episode will be offense. Whatever the next episode is, that'll be defense here on draft season. So, Tony, let's start the quarterbacks. We've touched on a couple of these guys already. You still have Shedeur Sanders at number 1. And Carson, you have 5 guys, with first-round grades. And if those that follow Tony, he's stingy with his first-round quarterback grades. He does not give these things out willy-nilly. So take note, he is Shedeur Sanders, then Carson Beck, then Jalen Milroe, Drew Aller from Penn State, and then Quinn Ewers, all with first-round grades here, Tony.
I think the first thing that needs to be brought out is none of these guys are setting the world on fire. We don't see any Jaden Daniels type, even J.J. McCarthy type of movement from the quarterback class.
Now, Tony, I will say this real quick. Sanders' numbers have been prolific, but if you watch the games, he doesn't kind of bounce like Daniels was last year.
No, and I think he tries to do way too much, and he's getting the crap kicked out of him. And also,
bad offensive line in front of him, really bad.
And the fact is they got smacked around. They beat Colorado State, but they got smacked around the first 2 weeks of the season. So when you're playing from behind and you can't get a running game going, because remember LSU had a quasi decent running game last year. Colorado's got no running game. Everything is on Sanders' shoulders, so you got to be careful with the numbers. I think with Sanders, it's a matter of just fundamentals. He oftentimes doesn't set his feet properly.
He drifts all the time, right? He's always drifting.
And that has to be figured out. We mentioned Carson Beck. Same thing with Jalen Milroe. You want to see more consistency. You want to see that these guys can carry the offense on their shoulders. Although in the case of Carson Beck, he may never be asked to do that because of the running game they have there. Drew Aller, he started off slow this season. He's going to move. They're going to now move into the meat of their Big Ten schedule. But there were times I went into the summer being kind of hot and cold on Drew Aller. There are times when you look at his pocket passing skills, he is phenomenal. He is just an outstanding pocket passer. But again, we want to see the consistency this year. Quinn Ewers, I know a lot of people love him and talk about him as a top 10 pick. I think he's a gunslinger. He's got a good arm. There are some things about Ewers' game that really concerns me. He tends to stare down the primary target. He's very slow pulling the trigger. I mentioned this to people in Texas last year, and they say, well, he just doesn't want to make a mistake. I still see that this year. Now he's got the injury, and Arch Manning is playing. We'll see when Ewers gets back on the field. But of all the top quarterbacks, that is the one that I'm most concerned about. And there are a lot of scouts that have a third-round grade on Quinn Ewers. They're not sold on Quinn Ewers because of the slowness pulling the trigger, because of the fact that he stares down the primary target.
All right, 3 more quarterbacks, Tony, I want to touch on that you have day 2 grades on. Cam Ward out of Miami, obviously the transfer. Jackson Dart out of Mississippi. Those 2 guys probably have the best numbers, Tony, of the quarterbacks we've talked about. They've been very productive the first few weeks. And then you have Connor Wegman from Texas A&M as your other day 2 grade, pardon me. Does Ward and Dart here have a chance to elevate themselves into round 2 or even day 1 conversation if they continue their production?
Ward, absolutely. He pounded Florida in Gainesville. Everybody thought it was great. And if Florida gets, their lunch handed to them by Texas A&M this week in Gainesville. So you got that kind of takes the shine off of that game. You feel, well, he's got a couple of big games coming up. He plays against Virginia Tech. That's got a terrific secondary. Then Ward and the Miami Hurricanes play against Louisville. That has a terrific secondary. Let's see how he does against those talented teams. But everything looks good. He's got great physical skills.
Yep.
And really what he's shown in the early part, especially in Florida, is He's got it going on between the ears. He's got great poise, and he's got great control of the offense. If that continues on, I could absolutely see him vaulting into potentially the first round. You look at the size, you look at the arm strength. Some coach is going to fall in love with that. I think Jackson Dart, he doesn't have those same physical skills. Watch Jackson Dart. Let me know what you think of his arm strength, because he's not a guy. He's more of a game manager, and he does it very well. But he's not a guy that can drive the passes downfield like Shedeur Sanders, like Cam Ward, like Drew Allar, like Jalen Milroe. Those deep passes tend to float. Doesn't have great velocity on the outs, which is why I think he will be on the outside looking in as far as a guy that could make a big move up draft boards.
I do think, though, I agree with all that, Tony. I don't disagree with anything you said about Dart. I think he's very accurate. And I think more so than any of these guys we've talked about, I think he throws with better anticipation than any of the guys he will release the ball before the guy's even getting into his break, and he'll get it there on time. So I do think it's a real nice contrast here with some of these guys in terms of what their strengths and what their weaknesses are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you about Dart, but when it comes down to draft time, what you describe is sort of a Peyton Manning type of quarterback, versus Ryan Leaf, and I love Manning because of that, because of his pass placement and thing. I like Jackson Dart. I have Jackson Dart graded as a third round pick, which is much higher than most people. I just think it's the lack of the arm strength which is going to sort of suppress his draft stock.
Yeah, and then last thing on the quarterbacks here, Tony. By the way, you have Riley Leonard and Will Howard. They round out your top 10, both with fifth-round grades. You can comment on them if you want. And I do wonder if NFL teams, and I don't know what's going on with Bryce Young. Both of us really liked him coming out. But I wonder if teams have learned a little bit over the last few years. The quarterbacks that have had success coming out have been the guys that have been very toolsy. And a guy like Young, who's a little bit shorter, again, he didn't have a great arm either. It was fine, but I would say his arm was, it's Jackson Dartish, right? It isn't that much different. I wonder if teams are just going to try to aim now for the tools and trust that they can coach some of these guys up at the next level.
Yeah, tools and the size. I mean, look at all the problem Tua is having, with the concussions. You got to, and that was always the downfall of these RPO, mobile, smaller quarterbacks. How were they going to be able to hold up against 265, 275-pound defensive linemen that could run 4.6, 4.65? So, it's an interesting contrast. They're always going to want the guy that can throw the ball 80 yards down the field, because they feel that they can coach that player to be a football player, to be a quarterback in the NFL. That's where the problem arises. So a lot of times they can't. That's why you have so many busts. But I think with Bryce Young, I liked him too. He came across as a genius. I just think there were so many bad things going on in that Carolina organization. It's not going to help Bryce Young.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then Kyler Murray, another smaller guy, Tony, he's had injury issues too, right? I think when he's played, he's been productive. Like, production isn't the problem with Kyler Murray, but he's had injury issues throughout his first 3 years too. That his ACL, he had hamstring, I think, his first couple of years too. So just something to keep an eye on here. But I think, Tony, all in all, I think given where we were at this time last year, even in the offseason last year, I think this quarterback class has turned out to be maybe look a little bit stronger than we thought it would, right?
It can be. I mean, everybody last year at this point, we knew about Caleb Williams. We knew about Drake May. We didn't know about Jaden Daniels. So I think it can be very strong. These guys just have to elevate their games and be more consistent to get people more excited about them, the way Jaden Daniels got everybody excited about his play.
Yeah, I feel like Cam Ward has the best chance to be this year's Jaden Daniels, right? The older player. He's transferred to a couple different schools. We've seen the talent, but he hasn't put it together yet. I think he's the guy that I think Tony has the best chance of elevating himself. And maybe Jalen Milroe, obviously, he's a little bit different, younger player. He's been at Alabama. People know him well. But he's another guy that has those physical tools that if it clicks, I think those are the two guys that have the best chance to be risers here on the board as we go along during the year.
No doubt about it. I'm a Milroe fan, so I'm partial to him. But what Cam Ward has shown in the early part of the season, you got to be excited if you're an NFL talent evaluator and you're looking at quarterbacks.
Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
All right, let's jump over to the running back position. And there is no doubt, Tony, this is a much better running back class than what we had last year, where we were struggling to find guys to even get into the second round of last year's draft. You have a couple guys with first-round grades. You already talked about Trevor Etienne. We don't need to touch on him again. He's your second-ranked running back. Ashton Giante at Boise State has just been dynamite so far this year. He's been fantastic. So let's start with those two guys first. You mentioned Etienne, but why is Giante top your board here at the running back position out of Boise?
Well, because he's doing more on a weekly basis. I mean, Trevor Etienne is a smaller, quick, elusive scat back, if you will. Although he's not shy running on the inside. Genty can run around the corner. Genty can pound that on the inside. He is a terrific receiver out of the backfield. I mean, he is just so multidimensional and multifaceted. And coming into the season, ATN was rated higher on my board than Genty. But you just look at what Genty's done, and you look at against, who he's done it against, after that week 1 win at Georgia Southern. And it's just the overall skill. You have third down specialists. You have rotational backs. Genty is the quote-unquote feature runner, a term that has basically left the lingo as far as scouting is concerned. But Genty is the guy who can be a feature runner as an interior ball carrier, on the outside, a pass catcher, not only out of the backfield, but they also line him up on the slot occasionally or on the flanks occasionally, and he does a good job. So it's just his overall game. And he's probably going to test very well. I mean, he's not going to be a 4.4 guy, but he's going to be a low 4.4 guy, low 4.5s, high 4.4s, well built, and he's a terrific player.
Yeah, I have not watched TV copying him. So it is Genty, not Giante. It's Genty.
You're asking me to pronounce a name the correct pronounce. Good luck with that, brother.
I will double check that. I'm glad to admit, folks, I have not watched a Boise State game yet this year. So I will double check on that pronunciation. I should know that. All right. You got two guys in the second round, Tony. Damian Martinez and Omarion Hampton. Tell the fans about them.
Martinez, again, if Cam Ward is not passing the ball at Miami with the Miami Hurricanes, he's going to hand it off to Damian Martinez, who transferred from Oregon State. And you look at Martinez, you look at the measurables. 6 foot, 241 pounds, a guy who's going to run in the mid to high 4.5s, and you think, oh, he's just an interior pounder. But you watch him play, and he plays fast. He's explosive. He's quick. He has the footwork necessary to make defenders miss, to avoid piles. He is. It's strange in that he's a big downhill grinder who plays exceptionally fast and has a burst, and is multifaceted in his game. Omarion Hampton is sort of the Genty type in the sense that he's got the strength to run on the inside, but he's got the quickness and agility to turn the corner, and he's a terrific pass catcher out of the backfield. So I think Hampton, Martinez, and Genty are all your 3-down type backs, where Trevor Etienne could be a 3-down back, but more, in certain schemes. A lot of talent in these top 4 guys. These guys all have the potential to be starters on Sunday.
All right, and now let's jump to your next group of running backs here, Tony. Also, you have another 6 guys with day 2 grades. These are all guys you have in the third round. Jaden Ott out of California, Donovan Edwards out of Michigan, Nick Singleton out of Penn State. We talked about him briefly, I think, last week or the week prior. Travion Henderson of Ohio State, a guy we talked about last year a lot. He decided to stay back. Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers. We talked about him last year as well. He went back to school. Ali Gordon from Oklahoma State. I know a lot of people have higher grades on him than round 3. And same for Quinshawn Judkins, who was the transfer to Ohio State. We haven't seen Ohio State play any big-time teams on their schedule yet. They'll be coming up. Curious to see how those guys work out. But your thoughts on that large group of guys in round 3?
Jaden Ott is a guy who has just got incredible speed. He's an explosive guy with decent size. He goes about 5'11", 5'10", 208 pounds. And he's not only an explosive running back, he's also a great return specialist. So he's going to fit in that day 2 area. Donovan Edwards, we've talked about him in the past. He's been okay this year. I would have liked to see more from him, being that he is now the feature runner at Michigan. But as we talked about in the past, I mean, Michigan lost, 6 offensive linemen? They talk about losing J.J. McCarthy, Clark, everybody. They also lost 6 offensive linemen, which is going to hurt them. Singleton, we talked about. Trayvon Henderson and Junkins, they're different types of backs. Junkins is more your downhill grinder. Trayvon Henderson, he's got better speed. He's got better quickness. He's more creative. Manegi of Rutgers is a guy that, he reminds me of Curtis Martin. And I know that's pretty big praise, but he's a guy who just finds ways to pick up positive yardage every time the ball is in his hands. 5'9", 205 pounds, probably going to run in the low 4.5s. Was kind of surprised he went back to Rutgers this year because I knew there was going to be a big workload on his shoulders. Scouts grade him as a third rounder. Just a terrific, doesn't do too much catching the ball in the backfield, in large part because the Rutgers passing game has been so bad in recent years. But he's a terrific ball carrier with great vision, with great instincts, and consistently picks up big yardage or even the important yardage when the ball is in his hands.
All right, let's jump to the pass catchers here, Tony, the wide receivers and the tight ends. We already talked about all 3 of these guys, but you have 3 players with first-round grades.
McMillan, I think, is going to be a top 5 pick. McMillan is going to be the guy that the receiver that everybody wants to move up to get. That could be upset by Travis Hunter because team will say, well, listen, we're going to have Travis Hunter as a receiver, and then we'll put him on the field in our nickel or dime packages, and he's got the athleticism, to also be a return specialist. McMillan's the most natural of them all, and he's got the best size of all the top receivers. Travis Hunter is, you're looking at Travis Hunter. He's a good receiver now. You're projecting as to what a great player he could be 2 or 3 years down the line. Luther Burden is just a game breaker. I mean, he's a terrific pass catcher. He plays fast. He shows the ability to hit the home run, and he comes up with big play after big play, and he does it all in a body that's 5'11", 205 pounds. So he's not a small receiver by any means.
Yeah, he's thick. Like, he's one of those guys that's very tough to tackle once he has the ball in his hands. I'm with you. All right, let's stick with wide receiver, Tony, and we'll hit tight end after we finish with the wide receivers. 2 second-round grades for you. Isaiah Bond, the speedster, went from Alabama, transferred to Texas. He's got that over-the-top speed, kind of their Xavier Worthy replacement there in Texas, right? And then you have Evan Stewart out of Oregon.
I mean, Bond, you saw him last year at Alabama. I guess it was a surprise to many. They decided to transfer to Texas. But he's got that home run hitting speed. He's a guy that will take defenders deep. Same thing with Evan Stewart. Stewart's not as refined as Bond. Right now, you could probably say he's a better athlete than he is a receiver. Transferred out of Texas A&M to Oregon. He's been a little bit slow out of the gate. Now you get into the meat of that Big Ten schedule. Let's see how he does. But he is a terrific athlete who's got game-breaking speed, who can make the big play, who really needs a lot of polish on his game.
Yeah, and then I did miss Emeka Egbuka. He's your 3rd receiver with a second-round grade. Someone, again, we talked a lot about last year. We thought could sneak into the back end of the first. If he's very productive, and now he's going to get overshadowed all year by Jeremiah Smith, Tony, the freshman at Ohio State, who's been unbelievable as a true freshman. But do you think Egbuka could still kind of stick out here and try to sneak back into the back end of the first round?
I think he's going to be very tough. And last year he was overshadowed by Marvin Harrison. The prior 2 years he was overshadowed by Marvin Harrison, right? He's got good, decent size speed number, 6'1", 203 pounds, 4.49 speed, fast, but not a true vertical threat. He's a nice complementary receiver. And I think for any guy like that, it's going to be very difficult for him to be a top 32 pick. I think it can be difficult for him to be a top 40 pick.
All right, so I got, let's see, I think 9 guys with either round 3 or 3-4 grades on them for you. I'll list them real quick. You don't have to hit all of them, Tony. You can just talk about any guys you feel like are worth mentioning. You got Adam Randall out of Clemson, Daquan Felton out of Virginia Tech, Kobe Prentice out of Alabama, Jalen Lane from Virginia Tech, Barian Brown out of Kentucky, Antoine Wells out of Ole Miss, Sam Brown from Florida, from Miami, pardon me, and he was a transfer. I think we've talked about him before. So any of those guys jump out at you?
Brown is the guy to keep an eye on. I have right now a late 3rd, early 4th round grade on him. Transfer from Houston, terrific size, speed, 6'2", 198 pounds, 4.45. has made some nice plays in the early going for Miami. Let's see if he's able to build a rapport with Cam Ward. I could see him making a big jump up draft boards. Daquan Felton, the transfer from, I believe it was Norfolk State to Virginia Tech. Super senior, 6'4.5", 215 pounds. Terrific possession type receiver, which goes along well with Jalen Lane, at Virginia Tech, the transfer from Middle Tennessee. 5'9", 196 pounds, but he's a low 4'4" guy. So he is the vertical threat in that Virginia Tech offense. They work well. They work well with each other. Antoine Wells of Mississippi, thought of highly in the scouting community. Transferred from South Carolina. Terrific size, 6'2", 208 pounds. Was a real good pass catcher at South Carolina before going down early in the 2023 season. He's got a lot of ability, but he's just got to show. He's got to get his game back to where it was, early in the South Carolina career before the injury.
All right, Tony, we mentioned how the running back class this year is better than last year. I think the same can be said about the tight end class, aside from Brock Bowers, who obviously was a top 15 type of player last year. But Colston Loveland, the tight end from Michigan, you have a second-round grade on him, along with Jake Brittingschool out of Clemson and Mason Taylor out of LSU.
Yeah, Brittingschool is a guy that when you look at the internet, you look at these mock drafts, he really doesn't get a lot of love. But the guy is 6'5.5", 231 pounds. He runs in the 4.6s. A lot has gone wrong for Clemson football the past couple of years. Brittingschool is one of the few things that has gone right for Clemson football. I mean, he is a big, long target who plays the tight end position like a receiver. He's not a bad blocker. He's a solid blocker. And I think he's got the potential to be a number one tight end on Sunday, as do Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end. Another longer receiver, catches the ball extremely well. They line him up all over the field. He was, when people thought that they were going to run the ball last year with J.J. McCarthy, he throw it out to Loveland. Went down with an injury Saturday, walked off the field in the Michigan who they play Arkansas State game, so got to keep an eye on that. But he's got an NFL type body. Mason Taylor's got great bloodlines. He's a terrific pass catcher, 6'4.5", 245 pounds, runs in the 4.6s. You talked about the LSU quarterback of earlier in the show. They've got a good running game. I think Mason Taylor, they don't have the explosive talent at receiver as we've seen in the past, especially as we saw last year. So I think Mason Taylor's got the opportunity to get a lot of reps this year at the tight end position. He's got a ton of upside. He's a fun guy to watch.
Any other tight ends you think worth mentioning, Tony? Aronde Gadsden, the second, obviously, that's a name that jumps out to me. Anybody else with those, third, fourth round grades that you think is worth talking about here?
Well, it would be Aronde Gadsden, who moves from receiver to tight end this year. He was a bigger possession receiver who everyone knew was going to be a tight end. Was injured last year, I believe, in the second game of the 2023 campaign. Comes back this year. Obviously, the name sticks out, but the talent also sticks out because he is a big, natural pass catcher who does a good job, or has always done a good job. But again, like Antoine Wells of Mississippi, now has to return from an injury, which put him on the sidelines for most of 2023.
All right, let's jump over to the offensive line here, Tony. We talked about a couple of these guys already. Will Campbell is still your number one tackle. You have Kelvin Banks right behind them. Then you have three guys with kind of first and second round grades, kind of that end of the first, beginning of the second round type of deal. You got Emory Jones out of LSU, Josh Connolly out of Oregon, and Diego Pounds out of Mississippi.
We already talked about Campbell and Banks. Talked about Banks at length last week, so if viewers want to go back and see that. Emory Jones, I know a lot of people think of him as a lock first rounder. I don't know. He's 6'4.5". He is strictly a right tackle. I think he can be a first rounder. I just am not as high on him as others. I am incredibly high on Josh Connolly, the left tackle for Oregon. He's very athletic. He's mobile. He's terrific in pass protection. He's outstanding blocking on the second level. The only thing is he may measure barely 6'4". So, are you okay with a left tackle that's 6'4"? If you are, then Josh Connolly is a first-round pick.
So I imagine arm length for him is going to be a big deal, right?
Of course, as it is with any potential left tackle. Diego Pounds protected the blind side of Drake May last year at North Carolina. and his film just blew me away. I watched it, and he was just, I was like, who is this guy? He transferred to Mississippi this year, so now he's protecting the blind side of Jackson Dart. He's a bigger guy. He's got a thick NFL build. He blocks with terrific fundamentals. I think with Diego Pounds, and we'll find out in the SEC, does he have the mobility? Does he have the footwork to stay at left tackle? Or is he going to be a right tackle on Sunday? But the fact is, Diego Pounds, who's now at Mississippi, is an absolute NFL prospect at the tackle position.
And then the next four guys on your list, Tony, are all tackles as well, all with second round, or two of them with second round grades. Josh Simmons from Ohio State, Blake Miller from Clemson. Then your next two players, Ariante Ursary from Minnesota. That's probably not even close to being correct. And then Jonah Savanea out of Arizona. All tackles.
Yeah. Simmons, I thought, played much better than people gave him credit for at Ohio State. This is a big year for him. You know, we've seen a lot of good offensive tackles come out of Ohio State. A good pass blocking left tackle who shows terrific footwork off the edge. Blake Miller has been up and down at Clemson, but he's a big guy. He's got an NFL body. He's strong, shows some ability on the second level. Ursay of Minnesota, 6'6", 335 pounds, moves exceptionally well, just needs to polish his game, but he's got a lot of upside. The Arizona tackle, Jonah Savanea, big, strong right tackle prospect. Dominates opponents at the line of scrimmage, drives them off the line of scrimmage. Not bad in pass protection, but he's a strong side blocker.
Depending on what South think of Connerly, Tony, you don't have a guard or center show up until round 3 on your rankings here. Tell me about the interior group.
Well, yeah, and the center class is just terrible right now. I mean, what will probably happen is, as we've seen in years past, there will be tackles or even guards that are projected to center, which may save the class. But right now, the center class really isn't a good one. Jaden Roberts of Alabama is your prototypical Alabama type of offensive lineman, big mauler, punch in the mouth type of power blocking lineman. You can say the same thing about Dylan Fairchild of Georgia, who's got enough size to play the tackle position. Charles Grant, who we talked about at length with Jim Nagy in our Senior Bowl interview. He is a left tackle at William & Mary, 6'4.5", 292 pounds. Project him to guard, mobile, zone blocking type of lineman, real good on the second level, real good in pass protection, but really has to improve his strength at the point of attack, which you would expect from a guy coming from William & Mary. I would expect, as we talked about with Jim Nagy, we talked about with Eric Galko, we're going to see Charles Grant in either the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl. I think people are going to be blown away by the way he moves on his feet. And then Donovan Jackson of Ohio State. I mean, we mentioned Josh Simmons of Ohio State a little while ago. Donovan Jackson was a player who, a year ago at this time, some people were projecting as a potential late first-round pick. He had a terrible year last year at Ohio State. As much of that offensive line and offense did, and disappointed last year. He made the proper decision. He made the best decision going back to school. Jackson is a guy, 6'5.5", 318 pounds, very athletic, very mobile, a zone blocking lineman who just has to improve and get his game back to where it was in 2022 and take it from there.
All right, folks, that's draft season for this week. Tony, anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
Nope. Next week the next show we'll do defense, and that'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'll see, folks. I'll tweet something about it when I tweet this episode out. I'll let you know if we're gonna have an episode next week or if we are just gonna wait till after that Giants Thursday night game when things get a little bit crazy around here. So we'll keep you updated. We'll let you know. And we're going to have Tony's top 10 on defense in that show. So it'll be must watch. And then maybe we'll start mixing in some more guests as we move along. As college football heats up, Tony, we'll get some really good games every weekend for us to talk about. There'll be a lot to do here on draft season, all brought to you by Moody's, a proud sponsor of the New York Football Giants. Thanks for being with us, everybody. We'll see you next time on draft season.
Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
When it comes to business, the people who succeed tend to be the people who seek out partners with skills or knowledge that they don't have. And that's what Lenovo's free online membership program, Lenovo Pro, can do for small businesses. If you're not a tech expert, that's where Lenovo can help. So you can add Lenovo's team to yours and then lean on them for all your tech questions for free. Visit Lenovo.com/Lenovo Pro to sign up for free. That's Lenovo.com/Lenovo Pro.
Lenovo.